Alright guys, the last comment I got was asking for advice on cities that are more expanded more vertically than they are horizontally. So let's take a look at that. This is another city layout variation for you. I'm going to zoom all the way out just so you can see what I've got set up. Let's focus on my system real quick just to kind of recap about how it's set up and why it works, and that's going to be this group in here. So my city is oriented more horizontally, right? Let's look at a couple of key ingredients here. I'm using my widest buildings in pairs, right? And these are also my shortest buildings vertically, because my city does not have a lot of space vertically. It has more space horizontally, right? So I'm using my widest buildings and also my shortest buildings, okay? Let's look at why that works. There's a couple of key ingredients here. In terms of vertical consumption, we want to keep these rows as tight as possible, because if we plug in a whole bunch of 6x6s in here, we're going to run out of space down at the bottom, right? Because I'm vertically challenged. The other key ingredient here is the infrequency of these little legs. So these legs are pretty far apart, right? Which means I can pack in a lot of 2x2 stuff before I get to a transition that I've got to pack with some trees. So hypothetically, on this bottom group here, let's look at that. If these legs are closer together, we either end up with 2x2 sandwiched up against both sides of the corner, which isn't the end of the world, but it's also not really ideal. The alternative is ending up with more 1x1 filler than you really want or need. Don't get me wrong, I like the 1x1 stuff, but I only need so many trees of patience, I only need so many shroom thrones, and then anything beyond that is redundant, right? So because these groups are narrow, I end up with more frequent legs in that group, and then more filler or more inefficiency on the corners. These groups are wider, right? So these legs happen less frequently, and they're easier to insulate with 1x1. So the two key ingredients here is that my buildings are wide and paired with the width of my city, and they're also shallow paired with the depth of my city, okay? So let's take those two key ingredients and apply the same principle to a city that's oriented more vertically. When you're setting up your nubs, we're looking for the tallest buildings now, right? Looking for the shortest and widest, we're looking for the tallest and skinniest on a vertical city. And you would set up your nub pattern the same way. This is 5 wide, this is 6 wide, right? It's the same concept as pairing a 4 tall and a 3 tall. Same concept there. And we're going to insulate these inside corners with 2x3, 1x1, and then when you get to your wider pair, insulate it with 2x2 or 1x3 and some 1x1 stuff, or just run 3x3 or 2x3 all the way down it, depending on the hardware that you got. And then from here, instead of putting our 2x3 stuff as filler on the inside of the nubs, we're going to run our vertical rows coming off of this nub group. So if you back up a little bit, my city layout looks something like this, long and skinny, and I've got my nubs set up in the center. and then I just have one continuous row that's all 2x3. Okay, makes sense. But my city is oriented more horizontally. So in a vertical setup, we're going to take the same principle and we're going to run all of our nubs on the vertical side, and then break up essentially my very long bottom row. We're going to break that up into smaller rows of these continuous 2x3. Make sense so far? Okay. And then from here, obviously, we're going to put our very largest buildings at the bottom of these groups. Here's the other part to that makes this work and efficient. At the ends of our roads, so in my system, horizontal orientation, I have my tallest buildings at the end of the row, right? Shortest buildings inside the row because it reduces my internal row height. And then at the end of the road, I have my tallest buildings to pair with that row height. So, opposite logic, on a vertical system, we're using our tallest buildings to establish this nub pattern, right? And now we're going to use our shortest buildings at the ends of the row. Yes? Because we have the vertical space, but we don't have the horizontal space. And all of these groups are paired with the internal row height that's getting established by this side over here. So essentially rotate this image 90 degrees to the left, and you can see that this is a nub pattern and this is the continuous row that I have at the bottom of my city running horizontally, right? My city shape looks like this. This city shape effectively looks like this. Makes sense? That's what this is accomplishing. And you could take this principle and do it in my city like this, which is effectively what we're doing here. Does that make sense so far? So, let's jump back to this design flaw that we talked about in my system, where I have narrow buildings, narrow and tall. This is the tallest 3 wide building I have, actually. I don't have vineyards. So this is actually my very tallest 3 by dimension. But the flaw with this system is that I'm using a tall building, right? And on a horizontal city, it's not a good setup because I have vertical limitation, right? So I'm using a tall building, that's strike number 1, and I'm also using a narrow building, strike number 2, because it increases the frequency of these little legs, these little nubs, right? So let's apply the same logic to this system over here that's vertically oriented. And now we're going to use, instead of those 5 tall buildings as the insulator on that, we're going to use these 3 tall buildings, right? And you can see automatically that it's going to increase the frequency of these legs on the vertical side, right? Same inefficiency that we talked about in this group, but now on a more vertically oriented city, the inefficiency would be your long and skinny buildings packed in there. Does that make sense? So Ori is not a good candidate for this nub pattern in a horizontally oriented city, but it's actually a really good candidate for a nub pattern in a vertically oriented city, right? Because it's tall. Road is not cooperating. There it goes. Makes sense? So, depending on the hardware selection that you have, mine is, I don't have anything that's 4x6 actually. I don't have Cathedral, I don't have Terracotta Army, I don't have Ketabo or Eagle Mountains. So it's kind of hard to demonstrate that pattern with the hardware that I do have. But if you do have a vertically oriented city and you have stuff like Eagle Mountains, Ketabo, some of the great buildings like 5x5 stuff, your layout would look something like this, where your long continuous groups are going vertically instead of the horizontal system that I have, right? We're going to be going vertically. Makes sense? Still an S pattern. And then from here, we're going to do Eagle Mountain paired with Kraken and CDN. And another Eagle Mountain. And your nub group is going vertically. Does that make sense? This would be Governor's Villa or whatever. There's your road. There's an Eagle Mountain right there. And then insulate these corners the same way that we just talked about in the last example with your 2x3, 1x1s, 2x2, stuff like that. Makes sense so far? And then at the very end of your row, you'd have your serene animals, crimson ships, anything like that that can be connected along the lengthwise. Because in a horizontal setup, right, I'm using my widest buildings as filler on the inside, and then my tallest buildings just connected alongside the bottom. So just rotate that 90 degrees. We're using our tallest buildings as filler, and then we're using our widest buildings at the bottom. In this case, the left side. Make sense? Hope it helped. Feel free to shoot me questions if you got them. Appreciate the comments, and drop me a subscribe if you guys like it. Thanks. Bye.